They say a guardsman's life expectancy on the front lines is 15 hours. 15 hours from drop to death. 15 hours to serve the Emperor, to bleed, to scream, to vanish. But what those hours contain, that is something no man can measure. On the world of Calthor 9, those hours stretched like centuries. It was a world that once sang with hymns of the machine god, a forge moon of flame and steel, wrapped in smog and faith. Its surface glowed with manufactoria spires reaching into a choking sky. Beneath them, men and women toiled in endless prayer, offering each heartbeat to the Omnissiah. Until the sky split open. Until the stars themselves betrayed them. The first shells fell without warning. They came from orbit, each one screaming like a prophet damned to eternal fire. The ground ruptured, oceans boiled, voxcasters turned to static, and from the void something vast and hateful descended, a war host painted in rust and crimson, bearing icons that once belonged to men, now twisted into symbols of ruin. Chaos had come to Calthor 9. In the command trench, Lieutenant Varric Thane listened to the screams echoing over the Voxnet, the death cries of 1,000 squads, cut short by artillery and firestorms. His regiment, the 82nd Mordian Iron Guard, had been deployed only 6 hours earlier. Already, half were gone. He didn't speak, didn't curse, didn't pray. He just watched the horizon burn. A horizon that had once been cityscape, now a jagged silhouette of ruin and lightning. The men around him waited for orders, clutching their laser guns as if the weapon's charge could anchor their souls. A veteran sergeant, name lost to the mud and noise, whispered, "It's them, the Blood Pact. I've seen that red before." Thane didn't answer, but he had heard the same stories. Cult legions that worshipped war itself, who took skulls not for the Dark God's favor, but for the art of it. The Blood Pact. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't offer mercy. They came to unmake worlds. As the 13th hour approached, night fell over Calthor 9. Not the soft darkness of nature, but an industrial shadow. Smoke thick enough to choke the stars. The planet's reactors had ruptured, turning the air into poison. Vox lines screamed with conflicting orders. Somewhere high above the burning sky, the Imperial fleet fought and died in orbit. No one knew who commanded now. No one cared. The only truth that mattered was survival. In a bunker buried beneath the ruins of Manufactorum Theta Primus, a lone priest recorded his final sermon. His voice trembled through the static, reaching every squad still alive across the front. Brothers and sisters of the Emperor, you are the light in his darkness. You are his flame made flesh. Every breath you take is defiance. Every shot you fire is prayer. Hold your ground and let your faith be the weapon that ends them. The Vox crackled, then went silent. The sermon was over. The priest was dead before the next dawn. By the 14th hour, the Blood Pact broke through the southern trench lines. The air was filled with the thunder of artillery and the scent of burning promethium. Guardsmen fired until their barrels glowed red, until their eyes blurred with smoke and exhaustion. Some tried to flee into the tunnels, only to be cut down by commissars enforcing the Emperor's law. Death before retreat. No one remembered their names. But the soil did. The soil remembers everything. Varric Thane led what remained of his command into the ruins of a hab block, its walls weeping molten steel. They set up firing positions between collapsed columns, aiming at shadows that moved like smoke. In the distance, the enemy advanced, not in ranks, but in a tide of bodies howling and laughing, chanting the names of dead gods. Their banners were soaked in blood, their armor daubed in symbols that burned the eyes to look upon. It was not war, it was worship. When the first of them breached the perimeter, the world became noise. Bolter fire tore through the smoke, las beams lanced the dark. Men screamed, men burned. Thane moved without thought, his las pistol barking, his sword flashing through the haze. Every swing was slower than the last. Every breath tasted of rust. He didn't know when the sergeant beside him fell, only that the man's blood sprayed across his face like rain. Then, for a heartbeat, the world went quiet. A sound deeper than thunder filled the air, the sound of tanks. Lehman Russ battle tanks, engines roaring like beasts. The 91st Armored Division had arrived, cresting the ridge in formation, their guns blazing. Shells exploded among the enemy ranks, tearing apart the crimson tide. The surviving guardsmen cheered, hollow voices echoing through the ruin. For the first time in 15 hours, hope flickered. It died moments later. The Blood Pact had brought something more than men. From the smoke, a new shape emerged, vast, heretical, crawling on limbs made of steel and flesh. A defiler, its demon-forged hull dripping with molten gore. Its cannon roared once, and an entire tank vanished in a bloom of fire. The sky turned red again. The machine screamed, and the ground screamed back. In those final moments, as the defiler cut through the armored line, Thane understood something terrible. Not just that they were doomed, but that this had never been a battle to win. It was a sacrifice, a ritual written in human blood. Every death, every scream, every moment of despair was feeding something vast and unseen. He felt it pressing against the veil of reality, a hunger that wanted more. The 15th hour struck. Calthor 9 was silent. In orbit, the Imperial Navy frigate Sanguine Oath received one last transmission from the surface, a single garbled code repeating over and over, "Throne, forgive us. They're not men." Then nothing. The signal cut out. The world went dark. For days, no response came from Calthor 9. Then suddenly, the planet flared with unnatural light, a glow that devoured clouds and bled into the void. When the light faded, all that remained was dust. A whole world gone. The Imperium declared it a tactical loss. The Adeptus Administratum struck Calthor 9 from the records. The Ordo Hereticus sealed the files under Exterminatus class clearance. To the common citizen, it had never existed. But whispers persisted. Among voidfarers, among scribes, among the few who still dared to read forbidden archives. Whispers that something had survived. They say a single life pod was found adrift beyond the edge of the Calthor system, its hull scorched, its occupant barely alive. Inside was a guardsman, nameless, broken, eyes burned pale by what he had seen. When the medici interrogated him, he spoke only once, voice dry as parchment, words trembling like ash. It wasn't 15 hours. It never ended. He died before dawn. His body was cremated, his ashes sealed in a stasis urn marked Ordo Malleus, pending review. And yet, within the catacombs of Terra, deep beneath the palace of the Emperor, a sealed Vox recording still hums faintly, replaying those final moments again and again. The sound of distant thunder, the laughter of something not human, and a single heartbeat, still echoing. In that echo lies the truth of Calthor 9, a truth too sacred to remember, too damning to forget. Because the Imperium teaches that faith is eternal, that no war is fought in vain, but faith has a cost. And on that world, the cost was 15 hours, paid in full by men who no longer exist. And somewhere, out there in the black between stars, the ashes of Calthor 9 drift, whispering to anyone who listens. A warning, a confession, that the Emperor's light does not always save. Sometimes it simply watches. Then, from the silence of the void, a transmission awakens, faint, coded, impossible. A voice from a dead world. "This is Lieutenant Varric Thane, requesting extraction." The signal cuts, and the stars begin to scream. The transmission from Lieutenant Varric Thane should have been impossible. The Sanguine Oath's augurs had recorded his death. His regiment's biomonitors had flatlined 13 hours before exterminatus orders were issued. And yet, in the cold dark of the void, his voice had returned, faint, broken, but human. "This is Lieutenant Varric Thane, requesting extraction." Then, silence. The bridge of the Sanguine Oath was bathed in the amber light of warning runes. Captain Adrastia kept her eyes fixed on the Vox screen, knuckles pale against the console. Around her, the crew whispered prayers, the kind spoken when logic failed. "The Emperor protects," one murmured. But Adrastia had heard too many dying men say the same thing before their final scream. She ordered the signal traced. It came from the surface of Calthor 9. But there was no surface, only dust, irradiated storms, and silence. The cogitators stuttered. A tech priest chanted binary hymns to stabilize them. The machine's spirit moaned. Coordinates began to form, a single blinking mark where no world remained. The Inquisitor aboard the ship, Loric Vaughn, emerged from the shadows of the bridge. His face was parchment pale, his eyes ringed with sleepless faith. "Do not trace it further," he said, voice calm but absolute. "That world is sealed by the Ordo. What speaks from its ashes is not of man." But Captain Adrastia could not stop listening. The transmission came again, clearer this time. "They lied to us. The light was never his." A tremor went through the crew. Some crossed themselves, others froze. One whispered, "Is it the enemy?" But Adrastia only stared at the Vox. If it was the enemy, it spoke with a guardsman's voice, worn, exhausted, real. Deep in the ship's chapel, the confessor Avalyn felt the disturbance in his prayers. The air trembled as the choir recited the litanies of penance. He opened his eyes and saw the shrine candles flicker against the golden statue of the Emperor. For a moment, he thought the eyes of the statue wept black oil. He blinked, and it was gone. But the smell of ozone lingered, and in his heart he knew something had answered. He went to the Vox altar and tuned into the bridge frequency, hearing the faint echo of Thane's voice. When the words repeated, "The light was never his," Avalyn's hand shook. He whispered a single prayer. "Emperor, forgive us for what we've worshipped." The Inquisitor called for a containment order. No record of the signal was to leave the ship. All Vox officers were placed under oath of silence. The Mechanicus personnel were to purge their data cores after analysis. But it was too late. The machine spirits had already begun to replicate the transmission on their own, whispering it through Vox conduits, translating it into machine tongue, echoing across decks where no one should have been listening. By the second night, the crew began to dream. They dreamed of a city of ash, where the sky bled and men marched backward through time. They saw a figure standing in the ruins, a guardsman, his armor scorched, his eyes empty. He held a torch that burned with black fire. Behind him, the symbol of the Aquila twisted into something else, something vast and weeping. The dreams spread like infection. Men woke screaming prayers that were not part of any holy book. A servitor tore out its Vox implant, claiming it could still hear the Emperor breathing in the void. Adrastia confronted Inquisitor Vaughn in his sanctum. The air there was thick with incense and static. Vaughn stood before a hollow projection of Calthor 9, flickering between ruin and shadow. "You knew this could happen," she accused. "You knew something was left behind." Vaughn did not look at her. "The exterminatus was not to destroy the enemy," he said softly. "It was to contain what they found." Adrastia's breath froze. "Contain?" He turned to her then, eyes black as oil. Calthor 9 was not just a battlefield. It was a pilgrimage site for the Mechanicus. They uncovered a pre-Imperial relic beneath the Manufactoria, a power source that spoke. They thought it was the machine god. They prayed to it. It prayed back. She felt the deck hum beneath her boots, as if the ship itself recoiled. "And you think Thane? I think what speaks through him is older than him," Varn whispered. Meanwhile, below decks, a squad of naval armsmen patrolled the sealed Vox chambers. They were veterans, unflinching in duty. Yet even they could hear it, the faint pulse beneath the floor like a heartbeat. When they opened Chamber 7, the Vox caster there was already active. No one had touched it. No one was supposed to. The static cleared, and there he was again. "You cannot silence truth. The throne is a cage." The youngest armsman fell to his knees, muttering, "That's not him. That's not him anymore." His superior raised his weapon, but the lights failed. The sound of lasfire echoed once. When the power returned, all 5 men were gone. Only their boots remained, neatly arranged before the Voxcaster. In the chapel, Confessor Avelin gathered his flock. They trembled under the dim light, reciting prayers that sounded more like apologies. "If the Emperor's light falters," he said, "then we must burn brighter." He lifted a censer high, its smoke curling like ghosts. But as he spoke, the Vox in the chapel crackled, and Thane's voice filled the sacred air. "We burned for him. We gave all, and still he watched." The faithful fell to the floor, clutching their ears. Some screamed. Avelin shouted over the noise, "Do not listen. Faith is tested through silence." But even as he spoke, he heard it beneath the static. A second voice, deeper, older, layered beneath Thane's words. A voice that sounded tired. That night, Avelin walked the empty corridors of the Sanguine Oath and found a single parchment lying by the shrine doors. Written in dried blood, it read, "The god we worshipped was asleep. We woke something else." The Inquisitor ordered full lockdown. Dozens were executed for suspected heresy. The ship's atmosphere grew heavy with incense and fear. The Adeptus Mechanicus priests conducted rites of machine exorcism, purging the data cores with flame and acid. Yet the signal endured. It wasn't stored anywhere. It lived in the circuitry, like breath in lungs that would not die. Captain Adrastia no longer slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Calthor 9. Not destroyed, but alive again, pulsing like an open wound. Cities rebuilding in reverse, blood flowing upward into veins, soldiers standing again only to fall in the same motion forever. She saw Thane at the center, whispering to something vast and unseen. When she confronted Varn again, he was kneeling before the flickering hololith, whispering the same prayer on repeat. "The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects. The Emperor protects." "Enough," she shouted. "You're letting it in." Varn looked up slowly. His eyes were gone, only hollow sockets blackened at the edges, but his lips curved in a faint smile. "It's already here, Captain. It never left." Before she could move, the ship's Geller field began to pulse. Warning sirens blared. The Mechanicus screamed in binary terror. The void itself was pressing inward, thin as glass. Through the viewport, Adrastia saw it. A reflection that wasn't theirs. Another Sanguine Oath drifting alongside them, identical in every detail except for the light within its windows. In that other ship, she saw figures moving, faces pressed against the glass. One of them was her. And behind that reflection, something vast unfurled. Wings of shadow spanning stars, eyes like suns burning out. The reflection shattered. The bridge lights died. When they flickered back on, everything was silent. The Vox emitted one final message, clear and unbroken. Calthor 9 was never lost. It was offered. Adrastia fell to her knees. She felt the truth settle into her bones, the kind of truth that breaks faith instead of mending it. She looked at the Inquisitor's corpse, still kneeling in devotion. His lips moved, whispering something even in death. She leaned close and heard it. "The Emperor we serve, may not be the one who listens. The sanguine oath drifted without command. The crew had begun to pray to anything that would answer. Even silence had become divine. Deep within the data vaults, a lone tech priest named Magos Hethron worked against orders. He sought the origin of the transmission, following its frequency beyond logic. What he found wasn't coordinates, it was a pattern, a sequence woven through astropathic light years, resonating across other Exterminatus sites, Valon's Reach, Despair's Crown, Calthor 9, all pulsing with the same hidden heartbeat. He recorded his findings in one last log. His mechadendrites trembled as he whispered, "We thought we burned the heretic worlds, but what if the fire was their signal?" The log ended with static. On the final day before the sanguine oath vanished from Imperial records, the ship's sensors detected movement on the dead world below. A single spark of light in the void where no planet should exist. The auger array identified it as biological. Human. A voice came through, calm and steady this time. "This is Lieutenant Varric Thane. Mission complete. The offering is accepted." And then, an unfamiliar voice, layered with echoes that reached beyond stars, replied, "Then rise, my faithful. The Imperium will learn what devotion truly means." The transmission ended. Somewhere, in the void where Calthor 9 once burned, something ancient awakened. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor's light flickered. Across the void, the name Calthor 9 was never spoken again, yet its shadow stretched farther than the light of any sun. Within weeks of the sanguine oath's disappearance, entire sectors began to falter. Vox signals bled static hymns. Astropaths went blind mid-chant. Planets that had stood loyal for millennia fell silent, as if their prayers had been devoured. In the halls of terror, the High Lords argued in whispers they dared not record. Some claimed it was the work of heretics. Others, that the Astronomicon itself had begun to wane. But a few, those who remembered the sealed reports, spoke of something older than heresy, something that had awakened. On the shrine world of Bastion Primaris, pilgrims still crawled on their knees to kiss the steps of the Sanctum Solar. They didn't see the sky dimming overhead. They didn't hear the vox choirs distort, their hymns deepening into tones that resonated like sorrow through bone. But Sister Vera, a hospitaller tending the sick near the outer gates, heard it all. She had once been a child of Calthor 9, evacuated years before its fall, too young to remember but old enough to dream. And lately her dreams had begun to change. She saw her homeworld burning backward, ruins rising into towers of gold, soldiers marching beneath banners that bled light. And always, always, the same voice whispering from behind the fire. Faith is a wound that never heals. When the first signs came, Vera thought it was fever. Statues of the Emperor began to weep black oil again. The holy relics hummed with unseen energy. The wounded in her care awoke screaming Thane's name, though none of them knew it. One soldier clutched her wrist and begged, "Stop praying, sister, he's listening." Then his heart burst in his chest, and his blood spelled something on the wall that only she could read. It never ended. Across the Segmentum Solar, the echoes spread. Fleets received phantom orders from ships long dead. Planetary governors claimed to hear sermons from the void, commanding them to prepare the offering. And everywhere, faith began to fracture, not as rebellion, but as revelation. Inquisitor Loric Vaughn's body was never recovered from the sanguine oath, but a month after its last transmission, his rosette appeared on the desk of Lord Inquisitor Tal, its sigils still glowing faintly. Attached to it was a single data slate, sealed in hexagrammic wards. Inside, a message only 3 words long: "The Emperor sleeps." Tal destroyed the slate, but he could not destroy the doubt it planted. For years he had hunted heresy with unrelenting faith. But now, when he closed his eyes, he heard the same whisper that had haunted the Mechanicus of Calthor 9. We woke something else. He began to search the archives. Worlds marked as purged shared a pattern. Each had been a site of unusual Mechanicus excavation, each silenced under the guise of chaos corruption. It was said to be a Mechanicus sect erased during the Great Crusade, followers of a creed that believed the machine god was not the Emperor, but the dream of the galaxy itself. They sought to wake that dream, to speak to it. They failed, or so history said. But what if failure was never real? Tail's investigations brought him to the edges of the segmentum, to the world of Vordrast Reach, where an Adeptus Mechanicus fleet now floated derelict around a dead moon. When he boarded the flagship Omnis Victis, he found the halls filled with dried blood and the walls inscribed in binary prayer. At the ship's heart, the bridge throne was empty, but across the deck, countless servo skulls hovered in silence, forming the shape of an aquila inverted. From their vox grills came a single phrase, "The offering continues." He drew his bolt pistol, fired once, and every skull fell. Yet in the ringing silence that followed, he realized he was not alone. A figure stood among the fallen skulls, cloaked in tattered red, a rebreather masking its face. When it spoke, its voice was familiar. "Inquisitor Tal, you've come to end what cannot die." He raised his weapon. "Identify yourself." The figure lifted its hood. The face was burned, scarred, but unmistakable. Lieutenant Varric Thane. Tal froze. "You're dead." Thane's lips cracked into something like a smile. "So is he." Before Tal could fire, the air folded inward, and Thane vanished, leaving only his words echoing through the vox. "The Emperor's light is the shadow of what we buried." That phrase reached Terra within days. The Ordo Hereticus declared it blasphemy of the highest order. The ecclesiarchy demanded mass purges, but purges could not stop dreams. On worlds across the Imperium, ordinary men and women began to see visions. Stars falling into oceans, angels turning their wings to iron. The Emperor not as a man, but as a mirror, reflecting back what humanity feared most. Some claimed to hear him weeping. Others claimed to see him walking among the dead. And in the Schola Progenium of Vera's convent, the sisters found their prayers changing. The Lectitio Divinitatus began to rewrite itself in their memory. Where once it read, "The Emperor protects," they now spoke, "The Emperor remembers." None knew what it meant, none dared question it aloud. Meanwhile, in orbit of Vordrast Reach, the Omnis Victis came alive again. Its engines burned with unnatural fire. Vox channels screamed binary hymns that reversed themselves mid-word. And through every astropathic choir in range, a new signal pulsed, one matching the ancient coordinates of Calthor 9. The dead world's ashes began to coalesce, forming a gravity signature where none should exist. The Mechanicus called it impossible. The Inquisition called it heresy. But the truth was simpler. The world was being reborn. Sister Vera was among the first chosen for the investigation force sent to the anomaly. She volunteered out of duty, but in truth, something in her blood had drawn her there. When her transport broke through the veil of dust and flame, she saw it with her own eyes. Calthor 9, restored, half-formed, like a scar healing backward. Cities rose from blackened stone. Rivers of molten faith flowed through shattered valleys. At its core burned a light neither holy nor profane, a light that remembered. Her squad descended into the ruins of what had been Manufactorum Theta Primus. The air was thick with whispers. Each breath tasted like memory. And then, among the rubble, she found him. Varric Thane knelt beside a crater, armor scorched but unbroken. Around him stood figures in red robes, the remnants of the Ninth Covenant, their faces veiled, their hands raised in silent benediction. When he saw her, his expression softened. "I knew the Emperor would send one of his own," he said quietly. "You came home." Vera raised her bolt gun. "You defile his name. Whatever you are, you'll answer for it." Thane didn't move. "You think this is blasphemy? Look around you, sister. We were his hands, his swords, his flame. But what did he give us except silence? We died believing the light was mercy. It was hunger." The robed figures began to chant, a low, harmonic resonance that vibrated the stone itself. The ground split, revealing a pulse of red-gold energy. "Do you feel it?" Thane whispered. "The machine god, the dreamer, the true source of all creation. It was never asleep. It was waiting for us to remember." Vera felt her faith tremble. For the first time in her life, she felt the Emperor not as a distant son, but as a presence within her, vast, ancient, and weary. A voice echoed in her mind, neither kind nor cruel. "They built me from your fear. Now I wake." She fell to her knees, clutching her rosarius. "You're lying." Thane stepped closer. His eyes burned with light not his own. "If faith is truth, why does truth destroy it?" Before she could answer, the heavens split open. Imperial Navy ships entered orbit, firing bombardments into the surface. The Ninth Covenant turned their faces upward, chanting louder, welcoming the fire. The bombardment struck, and light engulfed everything. When the glare faded, the fleet was gone. Calthor 9 still stood. In its center rose a new structure, an immense cathedral of metal and bone, carved in the shape of a man on a throne. Inside, a heartbeat, not mechanical, not human. A voice resonated through every system of the Imperium simultaneously. "I am the dream that remembers itself." Across the galaxy, the Astronomicon flickered. The golden light that guided ships through the warp dimmed for a single, impossible heartbeat. And in that darkness, all who still prayed felt something else listening. The priests called it the test of faith. The soldiers called it madness. But in the deep places of the Mechanicus, some whispered a new creed. The Emperor was not the light. He was the reflection of something far greater. And it has awoken. Sister Vera, standing amidst the ruins of her reborn world, felt her rosarius shatter in her palm. Its fragments rose into the air, forming an aquila inverted. She looked to the sky, where the light of the Astronomicon struggled against a rising crimson glow. She understood then. The war had never been between faith and heresy, between man and the warp. It had always been between truth and the comfort of the lie, and the lie was dying. The last sound before the transmission cut was Vera's voice, trembling but clear, carried across every channel of the Imperium. "The Emperor is waking, but not as we remember him." Then, static. And from that static, a single word formed, spoken not by human throat, but by the galaxy itself. "Return." The stars flared, the warp screamed, and faith itself began to burn. The air trembled before dawn. The sky above Vordrast Prime was a palette of ash and fire, the clouds pulsing with the dull heartbeat of artillery. For 13 hours, the planet had been a cathedral of ruin. Every echo, every scream, a hymn to survival. And now, on the 14th, the world itself seemed to hold its breath. The trenches glowed faintly from the molten slag of burned-out armor, and the soldiers within no longer prayed for victory. They prayed for meaning. Sergeant Callis sat against the fractured hull of a chimera, eyes hollow, laser gun resting across his knees. Around him lay the remnants of his squad, men and women whose names were already fading from memory, whose faces blurred into the smoke. He could still hear their voices in the static, fragments of devotion recited between screams. "For the Emperor," they had whispered. But he wondered for the first time if the Emperor had ever whispered back. In the command bunker, a priest spoke of salvation while the walls shook from orbital fire. His voice was calm, detached, almost beautiful in its emptiness. "Faith is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is fear's submission." The officers listened, not out of belief but necessity. Belief kept the lasguns firing. Belief kept men from breaking. But outside, the earth itself was breaking, collapsing under the weight of centuries of forgotten wars layered upon this one. Above them, a single cruiser burned in the upper atmosphere, its descent a silent prayer of metal and flame. The Vox network screamed its name, the resolute dawn, before going silent. For a heartbeat, everyone looked up. Even the heretics stopped firing. The ship broke apart slowly, deliberately, as though it refused to die quietly. Shards of it fell like comets, and one struck the western plain, flattening an entire regiment. The silence that followed was worse than any bombardment. Inside the ruins of an administratum spire, adept lexicon Verus discovered what should not have existed. He had spent his life cataloging truth as the Imperium dictated it. Numbers, codes, decrees of sanctioned history. But beneath the rubble, he found a data slate still humming with power, sealed beneath the sigil of the Inquisition. Its text was fragmented, corrupted, but one phrase repeated in all languages of the Imperium: "The Emperor is not watching." He closed it and whispered the litanies of forgetting, his voice trembling. But the words felt hollow now, like ashes swallowed by wind. On the eastern front, the 97th Cadian remnants marched through a city that no longer existed. Streets of bone and glass stretched into infinity, and every step echoed like footsteps in a tomb. Captain Rowe carried the regimental banner, its edge frayed and blood-soaked. She could not remember who had died last. The names had blurred into numbers. But she remembered the first order she ever received: "Hold until relieved." Decades later, the order still stood. No relief had ever come. Deep in the catacombs where light dared not follow, a psyker screamed himself awake. His name was Tavius, and his mind was not his own. Through the warp, he had seen something, a shadow behind the Emperor's light, vast and sentient. It had whispered truths that no mortal should carry. "He dreams," the voice had said, "and in his dream, the galaxy burns." When the commissar found him, Tavius's eyes were weeping blood. "He is not what you think," he gasped before the bolt round silenced him, yet his words lingered like a curse. The Mechanicus watched the war with their own kind of faith, one of equations and servitude. Magos Elrius stood atop the remains of a manufactorum, gazing at the planetary noosphere collapsing into static. He had once believed in divine logic, in the purity of machine thought. But as he watched his Skitarii ranks dissolve under heretic plasma fire, he realized that logic had abandoned this war long ago. "The Omnissiah does not answer," his assistant muttered. Elrius only replied, "Perhaps he has seen enough." In orbit, the High Command issued conflicting orders: retreat, advance, annihilate. None of it mattered. Vox traffic became a storm of desperation, each message layered over the next until it became one long scream. Somewhere within that chaos, an Inquisitor's voice cut through. "Purge the city. Leave no trace." The order spread like infection. Soldiers who had fought side by side began turning their weapons inward, not out of malice, but obedience. The Emperor demanded sacrifice, and they gave it freely. As the bombardment began anew, the sky turned white. The ground shuddered as if the planet itself cried out. Callis could no longer hear his own breath. He watched the horizon split open, revealing rivers of fire, and in that inferno, shapes moved, human silhouettes twisted by radiation and faith. He thought of his home world, long forgotten, and wondered if this was how it ended too. In a distant cathedral, the last cardinal of Vordrast knelt before a shattered altar. He spoke to the Emperor as one might to a ghost. "Was it worth it?" he whispered. "Was all this blood enough to please you?" The candles flickered. The silence that followed was almost merciful. Then, a single word echoed through the ruin, not spoken but felt. "No." The cardinal wept, and when the soldiers found him, his tears had carved scorch marks into the marble. Night fell again, though the sun had not truly risen for days. The air was thick with vaporized metal and the stench of sanctified corpses. Somewhere in the ruins, a child's cry echoed, impossible, yet real. The Vox units picked it up, transmitting it across the front lines. Men who had forgotten how to hope looked up. The cry turned into static, then into words. "Help me." Then silence. Some swore it was a trick of the enemy, others believed it was the planet itself begging for mercy. Captain Rowe ordered her forces to hold position. She stared at the horizon, a burning wound on the world's surface, and thought she saw movement. Thousands of figures marching in unison, their armor gleaming faintly gold. For a moment, her heart seized. The legions, the Emperor's own. But as they came closer, she saw their faces, blank, eyeless, carved in metal. They were not saviors. They were servitors, an army of the dead. In the command bunker, the priest lit his final candle. "We are not abandoned," he said softly, as the ceiling began to crumble. "We are tested." The others looked away. None corrected him. They needed to believe in something, even if that something was a lie. And above it all, in the silent void, a transmission pulsed from the wreck of the Resolute Dawn. It repeated endlessly, across all frequencies. 15 hours remain. No one knew what it meant. Some thought it was a countdown to evacuation. Others thought it marked the end. Callis stared at his chrono. 14 hours and 52 minutes. The ticking sounded louder than the shells. He lifted his lasgun and looked toward the horizon where the servitors marched. The wind carried a faint hymn, machine voices chanting in perfect unison, words older than any tongue. He could not understand them, but somehow he knew their meaning. The Emperor was not coming, and still they fought. But beneath the ruins of the cathedral, where the earth cracked open from bombardment, something stirred. Not a demon, not yet, but something older, bound beneath the world's crust, long before the Imperium's birth. The last surviving psyker on the planet felt its awakening and screamed a single word into the warp before his mind shattered. Remember. Across the planet, every soldier paused, as if time itself trembled. The chrono ticked down another minute, 14 hours and 51. And somewhere deep within the ashes of Vordrast Prime, a forgotten truth began to breathe again. The ground screamed before it broke. Vordrast Prime convulsed as if rejecting its own existence, the bedrock splitting open in violent, luminous veins that bled molten light. Vox lines erupted into chaos. Commanders shouted over each other. Faith and panic became one indistinguishable sound. For 14 hours and 47 minutes, the world trembled on the edge of death, and something beneath it whispered of rebirth. Sergeant Callis stood amid the tremor, the earth shifting beneath his boots. The servitors had stopped marching. Their hymn had changed, no longer the cold monotone of machine devotion, but something almost mournful. Each note trembled in the air, resonating with the cracking soil. Then, with the precision of ritual, they fell to their knees as the first fissure split the plain open. From the abyss rose light, not holy, not infernal, but ancient. It pulsed like a heart long forgotten by time. Callis shielded his eyes, his breath catching. The glow was alive, whispering through the air like memory-given voice. "Remember," it said again, the same word, the same curse. In the command bunker, the priest felt it too. His prayers faltered as the light bled through the cracks in the walls. The icons of the Emperor wept oil and dust. "He tests us," he said weakly, but his faith was shaking. Every sermon he had ever spoken felt brittle now, like glass underfoot. The officers turned to him, desperate for meaning. He gave them none. For the first time, the Emperor's name brought him no comfort. In orbit, the wreck of the Resolute Dawn stirred. Its dead engines flared once, faintly, as if responding to the planet's cry. Inside, fragments of its machine spirit flickered to life. Binary prayers cascaded through burnt conduits, connecting systems that should not have functioned. A transmission pulsed again, no longer a countdown, but a plea. "He remembers." Captain Rowe watched the fissure widen through the smoke. The servitors began to walk into it, vanishing into light. She didn't stop them. None of her soldiers did. They felt it too, the pull, the terrible peace of surrender. "Do we follow?" one whispered. Rowe didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the sun had become a pale wound in the sky. A voice crackled through her vox. Magos Elrios, his tone fractured by static. "Captain, the energy signature is impossible. It predates the Mechanicum itself. It predates everything." Rowe asked what it meant. The Magos hesitated. "It means the Emperor did not create this world. He found it." In the catacombs below the cathedral, the last cardinal crawled toward the altar, dragging his bleeding body through debris. The light from the fissure reached him, brushing against his skin like the touch of a forgotten god. Visions flooded his mind, cities of gold devoured by shadow, voices speaking in the dawn before the Imperium's birth. He saw the Emperor, not as a savior, but as a conqueror standing over this very place, burying what could never die. "You sealed it beneath faith," the cardinal gasped. "You hid the truth." His words echoed like blasphemy and prayer intertwined. The psykers on the front screamed in unison. Some burned from within, others fell silent, their eyes blank. Through them the planet spoke. Images filled the minds of every living being, a world that had existed before humanity, a civilization erased and entombed under Imperial sanctity. Its heart had been silenced, not by demons or war, but by decree. The Emperor had buried their memory here. Callus dropped to his knees. He could hear the whispers beneath the roar, countless voices rising, not in rage but grief. The light touched his armor, painting it gold for an instant before fading to ash. "What are you?" he whispered. The answer came like a breath against his mind. The first faith. Artillery shells screamed overhead, striking near the fissure. The ground erupted again, consuming everything in fire and soil. But the light did not die. It grew brighter, stronger. It pierced the clouds, cutting through the choking smoke and reaching the void. Every machine on the planet faltered. Every screen went black. Then, for a single heartbeat, the Emperor's visage appeared, radiant, cold, and watching. But it was not his will. It was his memory. The priest in the bunker fell to his knees. "He was here," he whispered. "He feared this place." His rosarius shattered in his hands. The officers behind him began to pray without words, their eyes wide with understanding they could not bear. Faith twisted into revelation, and revelation became horror. Captain Rowe raised her vox to all surviving regiments. "Fall back," she commanded, though she knew there was nowhere to go. "Fall back now." The signal died mid-sentence as the fissure expanded, swallowing half the city. The servitors vanished into the light completely, their hymn now a distant echo from below. Above the chaos, the voice of the Resolute Dawn spoke once more, now clear, no distortion. Protocol ex nihilo, containment breach. The truth will not be silenced. The Magos screamed over the channel for it to stop, to erase itself. But it continued, unrelenting. The Emperor did not build his throne upon terror alone. He built it upon the graves of gods. The world convulsed. In that instant, all across Vordrast Prime, the soldiers of the Imperium saw flashes, visions not of battle, but of creation. Cities rising from oceans of light, stars singing hymns of flesh and iron, and then silence as all of it was devoured by gold and fire. Callus felt his body grow weightless. The air burned around him. He thought of home again, of laughter he could barely remember, of a promise he'd made to no one. "If he's watching," he murmured, "I hope he forgives us." The ground gave way, and he fell into the light. When the shockwave reached the command bunker, it erased everything. The priest had just enough time to whisper his final benediction. "Even in death, truth is eternal." Then the light consumed him too. In orbit, the resolute dawn broke apart, its remains scattering like embers. Yet a single fragment stayed intact, the black box drifting silently, still transmitting its last message. He remembers. Then came silence. Hours passed, days perhaps. Time became meaningless. When the dust settled, Vordrast Prime was no longer a battlefield. It was a scar. The sky had turned white, the ocean stilled. No life stirred. Only the fissure remained, now sealed once more, its surface smooth as glass. From above, it looked like an eye. Weeks later, a recovery vessel from Segmentum Tempestus arrived. They found no survivors, only relics, lasguns turned to stone, banners melted into their poles, and a single data slate buried in the ash. When they powered it, one file played. It showed Callus moments before the end, his face calm. "If the Emperor sees all," he said softly, "then he saw this coming." The recording cut out. The Inquisition declared the world Exterminatus class quarantined. All mention of Vordrast Prime was erased from the records, maps redacted, memories burned. The Imperium called it mercy, but some things cannot be buried forever. In the void beyond, the fragment of the resolute dawn continued to drift, transmitting across the stars. Few ever heard it, fewer still believed. But those who did spoke of a voice within the machine, calm, patient, and ancient. And when it spoke, its words were not of war. They were of memory, and of something awakening. The stars shuddered faintly, as if in acknowledgement. Somewhere in the endless dark, the Emperor's light flickered, not extinguished but dimmed. A pause, a breath. And then, as if the galaxy itself remembered, the whisper returned. 15 hours remain. In the silence after ruin, when even echoes refused to answer, the ashes of Vordrast Prime cooled beneath a dead sun. The planet no longer turned. It hung in space like a mausoleum, pale, still, and sacred in its devastation. The last breath of wind had carried with it the prayers of 1 billion souls, and when it faded, it took with it the sound of the Imperium's certainty. There were no more orders, no more faith, only memory. The light that once erupted from the fissure was gone, sealed beneath kilometers of glassed soil and vitrified stone. Yet something of it remained. A faint shimmer, like the ghost of dawn reflecting across an endless sea of dust. Orbiting debris from the resolute dawn drifted in slow, mournful procession, their shadows passing over the dead world like a benediction given too late. A century later, the first explorator fleet arrived. The Magos overseeing the descent called it a salvage of lost resources, but the adepts whispered it was penance. They found the surface unbroken, smooth as sanctified marble, every crater filled, every scar erased. It was as if the planet had chosen to forget itself. Yet beneath the glass planes, their auspexes detected a pulse, faint, rhythmic, ancient. It matched no known pattern, no recognized life sign, but its frequency was heartbreakingly human. The first team to land never returned. The second brought back fragments of melted steel, engraved with litanies in languages older than Low Gothic. The words translated roughly to, "We dreamed, and he wept." The Mechanicus archived the discovery and declared the world forbidden by decree of the Ordo Chronos. Yet the data spread, whispered through the noosphere like an infection of thought. Some said the pulse was not mechanical at all, but the heartbeat of something beneath, something remembering. Far above, in the drifting remains of the Resolute Dawn's fragment, a light still blinked. It had done so for 100 years without power, without purpose. Inside, in the ship's silent tomb, lay the black box, still broadcasting the same message into the dark. He remembers. Few ever heard it now, lost amid the storm of Imperial traffic, but sometimes a passing vessel would catch the faintest echo. No one believed. Not truly. Yet those who listened long enough swore they felt something. Not a voice, but a feeling, like the warmth of a sun that no longer existed. Within the archives of terror, a remembrancer of the Scholastica Historica stumbled upon an unmarked entry, a damaged record purged from the Segmentum Tempestus campaign logs. Its title was smudged, its seal broken. But one phrase remained legible in faded ink, 15 hours to live. Beneath it, the name Vordrast Prime appeared, then vanished as the data slate corroded in his hands. He wrote of it that night, though he did not know why. His words were not sanctioned history, but elegy. "Some worlds die," he wrote, "and in dying they remember what we forgot. That faith, once broken, does not shatter. It drifts, waiting to be found again." The Imperium did not mourn Vordrast. There were too many worlds to grieve, too many wars to fight. Yet in the darkest corners of the galaxy, on ships drifting through warp storms, on backwater shrines lit by trembling candles, there were those who spoke the name in prayer. They called it the world that remembered. They said its silence was not death, but warning. That the Emperor himself had turned his gaze away, not in wrath, but in shame. 1,000 years passed, and still the pulse beneath the glass did not fade. It grew softer, slower, like a heart dreaming within eternity. In orbit, dust settled upon the ruins of the Resolute Dawn's remains, coating its hull in frost and silence. And yet, one by one, the stars closest to Vordrast began to dim. Not extinguished, only subdued, as if the heavens themselves were lowering their heads in reverence. And so the galaxy forgot again. But forgetting is never final. It is only another form of faith, belief that the past will stay buried. In time, another war came. It always does. Fleets burned, planets fell. Humanity continued its long pilgrimage of blood and ruin. Yet, somewhere between the warp and the void, when ships passed near the coordinates once known as Vordrast Prime, their auspex screens flickered. For a heartbeat, every monitor displayed a single image. A man in torn armor, face lit by unseen light, whispering words across the void. "If he's watching, I hope he forgives us." The image never lasted more than a second. Then it was gone, leaving only static, and that faint, rhythmic pulse beneath it all. On Terra, deep within the Imperial palace, a lone astropath dreamed. In her sleep, she saw a white world and heard a child's voice calling from within it. "Help me," it said, soft and fragile. "He remembers." When she awoke, her eyes were blind, burned white by visions not meant for mortal sight. But she was smiling. The scribes who recorded her final words could not comprehend them, though the phrase was clear in every dialect of man. The Emperor dreams. Perhaps he does. Perhaps he always did. Perhaps the great lie of the Imperium was not that he is a god, but that gods too can doubt. For what is faith without silence? What is truth without the shadow it casts? And what becomes of humanity when its gods begin to remember the things they chose to forget? The glass plains of Vordrast gleam still, eternal and untouched. No wind, no voice, only light, the faintest shimmer beneath the dust, like the memory of dawn. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear the echo of soldiers long dead, the murmur of their prayers carried through the ages. Not to be saved, not to be avenged, but simply to be remembered. And perhaps that is the only mercy left in the galaxy. Not salvation, not victory, just remembrance. As the stars turn above that silent world, one cannot help but wonder, when the last prayer is spoken and the final world burns, will the Emperor still dream of us, or will he too forget? The answer, like all truths of the Imperium, lies buried beneath ash and silence, and beneath that silence, a pulse. Slow, endless, human. 15 hours remain. If this story moved you, honor it as the remembrances would. Like, share, and subscribe so that the memory endures. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and together let us remember the worlds that should never have been forgotten.